Welcome back to the Argentina Project podcast, brought to you by the Wilson Center. I'm your host, Benjamin Gedan.
And I'm your producer, Katie Hopkins.
Today we are joined by phone from Buenos Aires by Agustino Fontevecchia. He's the digital director of Perfil, one of the leading news companies in Argentina. He's also the executive director of Perfil's English-language Buenos Aires Times.
Benjamin and Agustino discussed tensions between the Argentine press and the Cristina Fernández de Kirchner government, and expectations for the media's relationship with President-elect Alberto Fernández.
On to the interview. Agustino, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. The government of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, 8 years before the current government of Mauricio Macri, was famous for its bad relationship with the Argentine press. In particular, it was at war with the most important media company in Argentina, Clarín. It had a campaign, the original fake news campaign, Clarín Miente, Clarín Lies, and tried to break up the company, but also poor relations with La Nación and a reputation for clashing with the media. I'm curious about the experience of Perfil during that period and, how the media environment has evolved over the last 4 years of Mauricio Macri's administration.
Absolutely. I do think it's important to go back a little bit and analyze the Kirchner administrations, both of them, or all three of them, Nestor and Cristina's, and their relationship with the media. Initially, there was a honeymoon period in which society and major media supported what was being done by the Kirchner administrations. And this includes Clarín and La Nación. They were not only fanboys of what they were doing, and the country was, picking up from a very big crisis, so that makes sense. But the last act in government by Nestor Kirchner was to sign in the permission so that Clarín could actually fuse its telecommunications and cable companies. So not only was there a honeymoon period in terms of coverage and in terms of society in general kind of being optimistic about an economic recovery after the 2001-2002 crisis, but there was also an alignment of policies, at least the government and the media industry. The only company was our company, Perfil, that suffered systematic discrimination from the first day, because the mechanism by which the Kirchners controlled the media, or at least initially played it in their favor, was the official advertising budget. Originally, they ballooned the budget and they distributed it across different entities, and every major outlet in the country received money, with the exception of Perfil. The honeymoon begins to break or to deteriorate and implodes towards 2008 with the so-called crisis del campo, when Cristina tried to raise export taxes for agricultural exports. And there had already been a lot of tension with Clarín, and that's finally when there's a break. And that's when then the Cristina Kirchner government goes to war with Clarín, and effectively, in my opinion, wins the cultural war of telling everybody that Clarín was not an objective journalistic institution and that media in general had interests. I think it's also a sort of global moment in which people came to realize that the objectivity of the media was not something that was true. Media responds to certain interests. But they lost the economic war against Clarín, which effectively won and continues to be the most important media company in Argentina. Now, if we go to the Macri years, there can be no doubts that the Macri administration had a completely different and much more transparent relationship with the media. And by this, I mean they allowed criticism, they gave press conferences, they gave interviews, they gave off-the-record meetings to people from different areas of the political spectrum. And they tried to be more rational with the distribution of the advertising budgets, even though they did pressure different groups. Página 12 received some pressure. Initially, Página 12 is a more pro-Kirchner, pro-Peronist outlet. But towards the end of the Macri administration, Página 12 had been receiving official advertising, which is a sort of supposedly implicit but quite explicit subsidy that the media industry has. So, and then one more thing that's important is that the Macri administration also signed into law regulatory movements that were, for example, favorable for Clarín, but for many other outlets as well. So I would say that there's been an evolution, and the type of pressure that the media suffered under the Kirchners was by no means what was suffered under the Macri administration.
Let me ask about the future now. I mean, you working at Perfil, which had a particularly bad relationship with the Kirchners, but others of your colleagues who also clashed with the Cristina Kirchner administration now see her returning to the Casa Rosada as of December 10th. And already we've seen from Alberto Fernández some tensions with reporters who have been covering his, incoming administration. There was a tweet that I'll let you describe, directed at a La Nación reporter that was quite aggressive and provoked quite a response from fellow journalists.
Yes, absolutely. So the journalist is called Hugo Alconada Mon, and Hugo Alconada Mon is one of the most respected investigative journalists in Argentina right now. Hugo Alconada Mon was the person, one of the leading investigators in the Panama Papers investigation, and I would say across the political spectrum that Hugo is a professional, and a good professional. So he published a story where he shows that a collaborator of Alberto Fernández in the University of Buenos Aires took the representation of a person involved with Lázaro Báez, who is a controversial businessman accused of being a placeholder for the Kirchners and who holds their fortune. And so Hugo Alconada Mon indicated that there could be conflicts of interests and improper use of this lawyer's closeness to Alberto Fernández in this case. And so Alberto Fernández came out responding, and in a very intimidatory manner, suggesting that in his government there will be no underground operations from judges, from prosecutors, or from journalists. But the whole industry came out in response, and most of the people here came out saying, you shouldn't mess with journalists, and you shouldn't mess with a guy like Alconada Mon. I think the deeper message, though, is what will Alberto Fernández's relationship be with the media? My feeling is that the different communication channels that we have seen, and I speak for Perfil, but I speak for the industry, are much more fluid than they were during the Kirchner years, where it was very militant, the type of journalists that had access. I think that now there's been a more mature relationship. So there will be access, there will be information, but I think that there will also be intolerance to criticism, and it will be hard for someone like Alberto Fernández to accept things that he doesn't agree with in the same way that Macri did. Because also Macri didn't really care about the media. Macri had a position where he understood that the media was a sort of antiquated institution and that it was better to communicate directly with the people. The Peronists have a long time history with the media, and they do believe in the media as an important element. This was very clear with the sort of war that Cristina waged against Clarín. So I think that we're going to see a sort of Trump-like tweet response to criticism from Alberto Fernández, and this will definitely put a tense situation with the relationship with the media.
The defenders of Alberto Fernández, have a different view. I mean, they say that he left Cristina's government around the time of her conflict with Argentine farmers. And in fact, when he was in, chief of cabinet for Nestor Kirchner, he was an intermediary to Clarín and other members of the mainstream Argentine media, and in fact had a pretty good relationship. That's what they point to versus the, recent conflict and the, indications from this tweet that in fact he's quite prickly and prone to attacking the press. So which Alberto Fernández is going to, control this relationship?
Well, that's the million-dollar question in every aspect of Alberto Fernández policy, is which Alberto Fernández will we see? Alberto Fernández is the leader of a pan-Peronist coalition that includes people that align themselves with Venezuela and Bolivarian Chavismo, and also people that are conservative in terms of their economic policy and in terms of their social policy. So it is quite a different group of people that he's trying to keep united. I think part of that unity was what allowed them to win the election against Macri. And so when we ask ourselves, what Alberto Fernandez will we see? We're asking ourselves that question on almost every front, on the economic front, on the foreign relations front, on the judicial front, on the social policy front. When it comes to the media, there are no doubts that he has a cozy relationship with Clarín and Grupo Clarín CEO and power strongman Héctor Mañeto. And as you mentioned, Benjamin, he did represent them legally internally in the government, and he left the Kirchner government when the battle against the media was kind of intensifying. So he will definitely have a good relationship with Clarín. It might take, and I think it's easier to say this in English than it would be to write this in Spanish, but my take is that Clarín as an organization understands what it has to do to relate itself with Alberto. The question is, how will it control its newsroom, which has been very strong in its rejection of the Kirchners. And it will be interesting to see that battle. When it comes to La Nación represents a conservative group of people that traditionally are anti-Peronists. So there could be conflict there. And then I think just in general with the rest of the media ecosystem, it will really come down to how they tolerate criticism, which I think they will have a low bar, and then what they do with the official advertising budget, which it is said that they will triple it from what the Macri administration was doing. But this is completely unchecked. We don't know who's going to be running the different entities that regulate the communications and media ecosystem. And there is a Supreme Court ruling that we secured when we sued the state at the time as Perfil. So that they can't use it to arbitrarily give rewards and punishments. So I do think that it will be tense, but it won't be all-out war.
Before we conclude, Agustino, I wanted to ask a question unrelated to politics, but related to the media climate, which is the business model. I mean, Argentina is not immune from the challenges that the traditional media has faced, globally, as subscriptions to the print products have declined and the very lucrative advertisements that had appeared in print have migrated to some degree online, but are much less profitable, or have found other ways to advertise not through traditional media outlets. What's the state of the news in Argentina in terms of the businesses?
It's a great question. As you mentioned, there is a global shift in consumer behavior. Of course, the internet and the rise of smartphones have fragmented our attention, and media outlets, be them journalistic outlets or entertainment outlets, our purpose is to get in front of your eyeballs. We want your attention. And so we have a much tougher competition for attention against very sophisticated players. When you add to that the fact that the internet has a culture of free content and ad-based monetization, and then you understand that ecosystem is controlled by the major tech corporations, particularly Google and Facebook, then be it Argentina or anywhere in the world, there is a major challenge for media outlets. When it comes to Argentina specifically, what we're seeing is that most major outlets are quite sophisticated in their understanding of the digital ecosystem. But like anywhere else in the world, we're struggling to make ends meet in terms of online. The ad money is by no means enough. So you have to charge the user. And users are not that accustomed to paying for news as they are paying for entertainment, such as a streaming service like Netflix or Spotify. Here in Argentina, Clarín and La Nación have launched paywall models. They supposedly have some 100,000 paying subscribers, digital paying subscribers that are not bundled up from other products each, which is a fairly interesting number. And other outlets are trying. So you have Página 12 as a donation model, and some provincial outlets are trying. Perfil is also in the process of doing it. And then you have the largest digital player, which is Infobae, which is pursuing a different strategy. They're going after a strategy of ad-based model and internationalization. Where are we now? There's a big problem with the fact that we have this sort of subsidy that is the official advertising budget that is necessary. It's a necessary evil for all of us. Unfortunately, if they cut it to zero tomorrow, I think that most outlets would go out of business, and maybe everybody but Clarín and maybe La Nación. So, there is a fine balance there in terms of figuring out our business model and being able to monetize without any support from the government in a country where, the government continues to destroy the economy year after year and administration after administration. So I'd say Buenos Aires, in particular, and Argentina in general, has a very healthy news ecosystem in terms of the number of outlets and the different opinions. But as a business, it's as bad as anywhere else, and even worse given Argentina's crisis. But there's resilience, there's knowledge, there's talent. So I think we'll pull through.
Agustino, fantastic analysis. Thank you so much. You're in the thick of it as the media environment in Argentina puts a lot of business and political stress on your company and others. And we hope to talk to you again as we see the approach of the new government.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure, and we'll see you soon.
And thankfully, our producer is a wonderful editor.
That's me, Katie Hopkins. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to the Argentina Project podcast on SoundCloud and sign up for our weekly newsletter at wilsoncenter.org/weekly-asado.